Good morning. Thanks, Rainu. Hope everyone has their coffee and ready to go. I'm Allison Karish. I am a senior clinical advisor in the Office of Medical Policy at FDA. And with me today is Suzanne Patty, regulatory counsel in the Office of the Commissioner, also at the FDA. And we're going to talk to you about key information in informed consent. So, there we go. So standard disclaimers, these views are our own and we have nothing to disclose. Learning objectives. So by the end of this presentation, you should be able to describe the purpose of informed consent, describe how two provisions in FDA's proposed rule can improve consent materials, explain what a key information section is, and describe tools that can improve organization and understanding of informed consent. Before we get into it, I do have one note. This is a high-level overview, so please see FDA regulations and guidances for specifics. Now, to meet those objectives, that's a lot to learn, and you probably have some questions already. So it is a good thing that Suzanne and I have answers. All right, so the first question we sometimes get, what is informed consent? It's something that sponsor, investigator, and IRBs are all responsible for, but what's it mean? So in August 2023, FDA published a guidance on informed consent that goes over all the specifics in detail. But at a high level, informed consent is providing information so a potential study participant can make an informed decision about whether or not to participate in a study. It's helping a person understand the study, providing the person with an opportunity to ask questions and get answers. It's obtaining and then documenting the person's voluntary agreement to participate in the study. And importantly, informed consent doesn't stop there. Informed consent includes providing information during the study itself. So what is the informed consent process? It's an ongoing exchange of information with each prospective participant. As I mentioned, informed consent does not end after the person agrees to participate. For example, if a protocol changes, additional information can be given, and participants may need more time to ask questions and get answers. Similarly, if new safety information becomes available, participants may need to sign another informed consent form to continue in the study, even though they signed an informed consent form at the beginning of the study. So that brings us to our first challenge question. Who is responsible for informed consent? A, the sponsor. B, the clinical investigator. C, the IRB. D, the participant. E, all of the above. Or F, A through C. I'll give everyone a moment to think about it. The answer is F. The sponsor, the clinical investigator, and the IRB are all responsible for informed consent. All right, so another question that we sometimes hear, what are the elements of informed consent? The informed consent process and consent form must include the basic elements of informed consent. If appropriate to the clinical investigation, one or more additional elements of informed consent must also be addressed. For applicable clinical trials, another element of informed consent, a specified statement regarding clinicaltrials.gov, is also required. And certainly, an informed consent document should include any other information the sponsor or investigator thinks is important to include. And you can find these at 21 CFR 50.25. So, the basic elements. There are 8 basic elements of informed consent that must be provided. My sense is that most of y'all are familiar with these, so I will go through them quickly. First, a description of the clinical investigation. This should include a clear statement that the reason to participate will be to contribute to research rather than to their own medical treatment. And the duration includes not only during active participation, but also any long-term follow-up. I want to mention that not only procedures related to study participation should be discussed, but if there are procedures that would be considered part of usual clinical care that wouldn't be performed on study participants, that should be discussed too. Second, a description of any reasonably foreseeable risks or discomforts to the participant. Sometimes people forget that discomforts part. For example, the consent form should disclose that the person may be uncomfortable having to stay in one position or may experience claustrophobia-like symptoms during an MRI. I want to also mention that if unanticipated risks are reported during the investigation, the informed consent discussion and documents may need to be updated with this additional information. Third, a description of any benefits to the participant or to others which may be expected from the research. Fourth, a disclosure of appropriate alternative procedures or courses of treatment, if any, that might be advantageous to the participant. This information includes appropriate alternatives available to the person, including a description of the care they would likely receive if they chose not to participate in the study. Fifth, a statement describing the extent, if any, to which confidentiality of records identifying the person will be maintained. And it needs to note the possibility that the FDA may inspect the records. Sixth, for research that involves more than minimal risk, the informed consent must describe any compensation and medical treatments available to participants if injury occurs. Seventh, the consent must provide information on how to contact an appropriate person for questions about the study and the participant's rights. And also, the contact information must include if a research-related injury to the participant were to occur. The last basic element requires that people be informed that they may decline to take part in the study or may stop participating at any time without penalty or loss of benefits to which participants are entitled. Please keep in mind that states or local institutions can provide more protections and may have other rules. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to the basic elements, there are additional elements, which are listed here, that need to be included when applicable. I again encourage you to read the FDA guidance on informed consent as it discusses all the elements, basic and additional, in detail. Now, that would definitely be a lot of information to put in a consent form. So please try to not write a book and bear in mind that longer consent forms can really limit understanding. Try to avoid making the informed consent seem like a complex legalistic form and avoid high reading levels that can hinder comprehension. These suggestions are to help prospective participants make informed decisions and prevent them from becoming overwhelmed. So that brings us to the third question we sometimes hear. How does informed consent relate to the conference title, Innovation in Medical Product Development? And for that answer, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? I can't hear myself. Cool. Thank you. Allison, thanks for the introductions. And it's great to be here with you guys today. Thank you. Yes, FDA is adopting and proposing some provisions that will be new to help improve informed consent. FDA published a proposed rule in September of 2022 called the Protection of Human Subjects and Institutional Review Boards. This will provide some new changes to parts 50 and 56. The provisions we're going to talk to you today come from the revised common rule, which is handled by the Office for Human Research Protections, or OHRP. This office is part of Health and Human Services as well as FDA. In March, we published a new informed consent joint draft guidance with OHRP, and this draft guidance talks more about the two provisions we'll share with you today. And it was prepared by a group of FDA experts with multiple product centers, as well as OHRP. We also consulted with patient representatives for further input. These provisions are both intended to help people decide whether to join a study. The first provision is that the consent must begin with key information. The second provision is that the whole consent must be organized and presented to help facilitate understanding. These both will help people determine whether they want to join a study. Your first question, I'm sure, is what is key information? Key information consists of critical or key information about the study. The consent must begin with key information. This includes written, electronic, or the oral consent process. The information in this provision will explain the study and the reasons why someone may wish to join the study. It also should be concise and focused. It also must be organized to facilitate comprehension. This is actual regulatory language. And if the FDA's proposed rule is finalized as we've proposed it, these will become part of FDA's regulations. Let's turn to the content of the key information. The draft guidance we mentioned examines what type of information from the informed consent elements that Allison just shared with you. We looked first at these required basic elements. We also considered the additional elements. And we looked at what information may be appropriate beyond the elements of consent. For example, what information is collected about participants as part of research if they're in a research registry study? That's an example that might be better for a registry study than a clinical trial. All right. Now let's turn to a key information example. In the guidance at the very end, we included a 2-page example, and I'm going to walk you through the concepts first, and then we'll share with you the visual. So we think it's helpful, since this is new, to put in a statement about key information. This would help the participants know what they're now looking at. Secondly, we think it's really important that you remind participants up front that the request for them to participate is voluntary. And third, a nice crisp description of the research and its purpose is good for starters as well. We also believe that the key information should include both some information about risks and discomforts, as well as potential benefits. For example, critical information about risks and discomforts could state that researchers do not know if the study drug will have side effects. The study drug also may not help the participant. Note that the key information should only include the main concepts about risks, not all risk information, because that could be quite lengthy. More information about the risks could be included in the body of the consent form. The key information also should include information about potential benefits. These should be clear, straightforward, and balanced as well. And the information about benefits should not be overly optimistic. Additional topics that could be addressed include information about the duration and the procedures. For example, this could include a brief statement about the length of the trial and procedures that may be performed, such as blood draws or an MRI. Information about whether any compensation and treatment may be provided if the person is injured also should be included. This statement could address whether the trial will cover treatments as well. And finally, another possible option could be to include other alternative procedures that may be appropriate for the participant in the trial. We encourage the participant to read the entire consent and to seek more information with their physicians about what's appropriate for them, and also with the research team. Question 5, what is not key information? Key information is not intended to be used in place of the consent process. Rather, it can be used to help guide the discussion about consent. It is not a change in the responsibilities for preparing or administering the consent. And it also is not a one-size-fits-all approach for every single study. Rather, we encourage you to look at different considerations for the different types of trials that are being done. We also strongly encourage you to consult with patient groups and communities for their input as well into what might be appropriate from their perspective for the key information section. Question 6, how can consent materials be prepared to help people better understand a study? This brings us to the second new provision in the regulations, proposed provision. This provision addresses facilitating understanding of consent. And in this provision, it states that the whole consent must present research information in sufficient detail, must be organized to help facilitate the participants' understanding of why they may want to participate or not participate. And the consent, I think I did that one already, hold on. Here is an example that we put into the guidance. I recognize that you can't read the words, so this is more to introduce you to the concepts that we embraced here. We did include the boxes we just shared on the other slides, like key information and voluntary participation. However, there are many ways that this key information section can be designed to help people understand the study. The working group prepared recommendations for designing the study using tools and tips that can aid with understanding. In this slide, we show you an example from the guidance. Rather than, again, you can use this way or we can talk about other ways. The main thing here is it's a relatively simple approach and it's a relatively simple trial that we used for the example. So we didn't want to get bogged down in the details. One of the key things that the working group looked at was an article conducted by some FDA staff and a third party that talked about how presentation of information may affect the ability of consumers to understand labeling for prescription drugs. In this research study, FDA found that consumers understood key information better, understood the prescription labeling better when it was provided in a simple format with information grouped together within a defined border. The working group, the article folks called this bubbles. And the bottom line is that the bubble format actually really worked and it improved comprehension. It was compared to an OTC labeling document and the med guide document. So now I'll talk through the example that I just shared and talk about the design tips that we took from this article, but also from plain language guidance that the government often encourages people to use. Here you see that we have used the bubble format, and that is having information grouped together in distinct chunks, which are easier to digest or easier to understand. We've limited the example to a few pages. We placed the risks and benefits side by side on the first page. We also used bullet points to help use simpler phrasing. We have encouraged the use of hyperlinks to the rest of the document or page numbers. We use simple text wherever possible. We also use white space or empty space to help break up the thick mass of text we often see as we're reading a lot of documents. And we also encourage breaking these bullet points and the chunks into two different columns. Question 7, is there only one way to prepare a key information section? No, of course. Please consider multiple approaches. We really want you to be creative and innovative to prepare this, and when you're organizing the whole consent. We encourage the use of video, graphics, as well as electronic consent. And again, we really encourage you to consult with patient groups and communities when you're developing this key information section. And after you've prepared the whole consent, it's also a good idea to consult with them to make sure it actually does what we're hoping it will do, which is improve comprehension. I also wanted to remind you that FDA published a joint draft guidance in 2016 for electronic consent. This was published as well with OHRP. And the document talks about the use of technology to improve participants' understanding, including diagrams and images. Like the written consent materials, we encourage you to target the information to the audience you have in mind, taking into consideration their age, their comprehension level, and perhaps their English proficiency or their health literacy is also critical. Why are these new consent provisions important? These provisions are actually important for several reasons, and they can improve more than just the consent information. They can help improve better understanding for the participants. That is really the bottom line. That's critical for what we're doing here. Using these tools can also help the presenter convey information more clearly. The information portrayed in these ways can help give the participant a useful resource they can take home. And actually, it can help improve enrollment, help retain participants, and increase diversity. We really think once you have, we know that enrollment is the hardest, longest part of doing a clinical trial. So doing better enrollment, perhaps more efficiently, hopefully, this can really help you in the long run. Question 9, what's next? Our next steps are that FDA must publish the final rule. Right now, it's just a proposed rule, and we're working hard to get the final rule published as quickly as the government can work, but we're really working hard on it. We also received multiple comments on many things in the proposed rule that we have to answer in the final rule. We also will go ahead and work with OHRP, our sister agency, to finalize the guidance. And we will be looking at the nearly 100 comments that were received on this guidance when it was published in March. Would you like to know more about informed consent? Here's a list on the slide with hyperlinks for the FDA resources. Today, we talked to you about the FDA's informed consent guidance that was issued last August, and this is the main consent information document. We also encourage you to look at our key information and facilitating understanding in consent, which was the draft guidance we just published in March. We also have a link here for the electronic consent guidance for more information there. Here is a link for FDA's regulations about informed consent, which are in 21 CFR Part 50. And here's a link for the FDA's proposed rule on protection of human subjects. Again, it was issued in 2022 and has a great information in it. Challenge question B. Which of the following statements about key information is true? A, the consent form must begin with key information. B, key information must include all basic and additional consent elements. C, key information must use bubbles, 2 columns, and white space. D, key information must be limited to 2 pages. Or E, nothing specific is required. I'll go ahead with the room. Does anyone in the room think A, the consent form must begin with key information, is the true statement? Okay. How about B, key information must include all basic and informed, basic and additional consent elements? Okay. Key information must use bubbles, columns, and white space. Key information must be limited to 2 pages. Or key information, there are no specific regulatory requirements on key information. The right answer is A. The regulations say that key information must be at the beginning of informed consent. Thank you. We have a bonus question. Who is responsible for key information? A, the sponsor. B, the clinical investigator, C, the IRB, D, the participant, E, all of the above, or F, A through C? All right, I'm going to go ahead to the answer. It's F, A through C. And the bottom line here is that the responsibilities for preparing consent, including the key information, has not changed. The regulatory requirements have not changed about who is responsible. The sponsor, the clinical investigator, and the IRB are all involved and responsible for preparing the key information section. Our main takeaways today are, again, key information must be presented first. The key information and the whole consent must be organized. We also, again, want you to be clear and concise. We don't want to read books when patients are coming to talk to you about consent. We also encourage innovation about the content and the approaches. Finally, we really suggest acting now. They're already in the proposed rule. We encourage you to just go for it. It's already required, frankly, in the revised common rule, which applies to federally funded research. Start adding the key information section and start improving approaches to the whole consent and process now. At this time, thank you, and we will go ahead and move over to questions.